This whole strange and terrifying story began about 3 or 4 days ago. It was the middle of the night when I heard some weird sounds coming from the stairwell. To be precise, it all started late at night when I had just come home from work and went to bed, probably around 2 a.m. I was just starting to fall asleep when the noise from the stairwell woke me up. At first, I groaned in frustration and turned to the other side, thinking it was just some drug addicts. The building I live in is old, and the management doesn't bother installing proper doors or intercoms. So the stairwell door, along with the others in the building, is always left open. This leaves the stairwell in constant disarray, which an old lady from the 4th floor cleans up occasionally. There aren't many young people in the building, so when I suggested that we all chip in to install a decent door, they just waved me off, saying they barely had enough money to pay the bills and buy groceries. So that's how we've been living. I should also mention something I believe triggered all the horrors I had to endure. My girlfriend and I don't live on the outskirts of town, but it's far from the center, and for the past 10 years or so, there's been an abandoned building on our street. Or so the neighbors say. I've lived here for less than 3 years, but I've already heard all kinds of stories about it. They say people have seen monsters, ghosts, even the devil himself around that place. In reality, the worst you'll find are some homeless drunks, or occasionally, a group of addicts hanging around there at night. The place also serves as a public bathroom. This abandoned building is a little to the left of our house, and the windows from our bedroom look right out at it. Not the most pleasant view, honestly, but our dark curtains helped. We never really cared much about it. Just another unfinished building, pretty common around here. But things changed on that night. Yes, the one I mentioned earlier. The night when I first heard those sounds. It was as if someone was deliberately opening and closing the stairwell door loudly. I could hear footsteps, someone walking in and out of the building, as if trying to lure someone outside, like they were setting up an ambush to jump them. It was 2 a.m., pitch black outside, and someone was just standing there slamming the door. My girlfriend, Marina, was sound asleep next to me. It was like she didn't hear a thing, even though the banging was pretty loud. After about 5 door slams, my sleepiness completely vanished, and I threw on my robe, got out of bed, and walked to the hallway. I turned on the light and looked through the peephole, but there was no one on the landing. I opened the door a bit, and, as I stood there, I noticed a strange shuffling sound coming from downstairs. But as soon as I turned the key in the lock, the building went completely silent. I opened the door a bit more, shrugged, and then went back inside. Before I could even reach the kitchen to grab a drink of water, the banging started again. Now, if we lived on the 5th floor, maybe I wouldn't hear it as much. But we live on the 2nd floor, and each slam of the door wasn't just loud. It was like I could feel it in my bones. "What's that noise?" Marina's sleepy voice called from the bedroom. I don't know. Some idiots are messing around in the stairwell." "Oh, I thought I was dreaming," she muttered. "Hurry up and come back to bed." "Just grabbing some water. Be right there," I said, filling up a glass. My throat was dry from a stuffed-up nose. Absent-mindedly, I glanced out the window toward that abandoned building. In the darkness, it looked like a giant black cube, with barely any movement visible near it. I tried to focus, but the only streetlight in that area was dim and barely lit anything at all. Then I leaned closer to the window, trying to figure out what was happening in front of our building. At first, I struggled to get a good view, so I opened the window just a bit and poked my head outside. That's when any remaining drowsiness I had left was completely wiped away. The stairwell door was opening and closing by itself. It would open slowly, then suddenly slam shut with a loud bang. The weirdest part? No one was there. Not a single person. At first, I thought it might be a draft, but as I closed the window, I realized, how could there be a draft? The stairwell was completely sealed off. And yet, the banging continued. Through the window, I could still see the door moving back and forth, but not just ours. The doors in other stairwells were swinging too. "Where are you?" Marina called again from the bedroom. "I'm coming," I said, pulling on my jacket. "I'm going to check what's making all that noise. I can't sleep with this racket." "Why do you have to be the one to go? Let someone else check. You're not the building's superhero," she grumbled, clearly annoyed. Ignoring her, I stepped out into the hallway. And just like the night before, the sound stopped the moment I opened our apartment door. What the hell is going on? I thought, heading downstairs. I reached the first floor and checked the front door. It was shut. I pulled on the handle, loose of course, and the door itself was barely hanging on. I pushed it open, stepped outside, and looked around. The courtyard was empty. Only 2 windows were lit in the entire building. One was ours, and the other in the 4th stairwell. Something strange was definitely going on. I stuck a brick under the door, hoping it would at least stop the slamming. By the time I got back upstairs, everything was quiet again. No more banging from the first floor. I thought to myself, good finally. I crawled back into bed and fell asleep, wrapping my arms around Marina. The rest of the night passed without incident. The next day was just another regular work day. I spent the whole day at the office, as usual. When I came home, it was around 11 p.m. I wasn't expecting anything strange, but as soon as I walked in, I noticed something odd. Marina was sitting in the dark in the living room. Usually, she'd already be home for hours, hanging out on her laptop or watching TV. But tonight she was curled up in a ball, looking tense. At first, I didn't even notice her. The whole apartment was so quiet that I thought nobody was home. Then I saw her sitting there. "What's wrong? What happened?" I asked with a smile, trying to lighten the mood as I hung up my coat. She stayed quiet. "Hey, what's going on?" I repeated, walking over to her. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. I sat down beside her. "It's that abandoned building. There's something wrong with it." "Come on, not you too," I said with a chuckle. Marina tends to believe in all kinds of superstitions, especially when it's fed to her by the old ladies in the building. They fill her head with all sorts of nonsense, and then she starts bringing home charms and reciting prayers to ward off evil spirits. I figured this time was no different. "Tell me what happened," I said. "I came home early today. I was cleaning up the apartment, wiping down the shelves, when I suddenly remembered I hadn't watered the plants in a week. So I grabbed a bottle of water and went to the bedroom to take care of them. While I was watering the plants, I looked out the window and I saw something." "What, someone working out in the middle of the night?" I joked. "No, just listen to me." She was on the verge of tears now. "It wasn't a person. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human." At this point, I realized she was serious, so I stopped joking and let her continue. I was staring out the window, and at first I couldn't see anything. But then under that dim streetlight near the abandoned building, I saw something run by. It wasn't a person, or if it was, it looked all wrong. "What do you mean, all wrong?" I asked, trying to stay calm. But now I was starting to get a little uneasy myself. I only saw it for a second, but its body, it wasn't right. It was like one arm was longer than the other, and its legs were crooked. It moved in this weird, jerky way. It was awful, Alex. I swear her eyes were filled with tears now. Okay, calm down," I said, putting an arm around her. "You probably just saw a homeless guy or something. You know there are people who hang around that place." "No, Alex," she said, shaking her head. "I know what I saw. It wasn't human." After that, I managed to calm her down a bit, and we had dinner. We didn't talk about what she had seen anymore, and I thought that was the end of it. But later that night, the door started banging again, just like the night before. This time, though, Marina woke up with me. "Not again," she groaned. "I think it's pretty strange, too," I said, getting up and grabbing my jacket again. "I'm going to check it out." "You're not the only one living in this building, you know. Let someone else handle it for once," she muttered. I stayed quiet, threw on my coat, and left the apartment. As soon as I opened the door, the banging stopped. The same thing happened the night before. I stood there, cursing under my breath, then glanced out toward the abandoned building. I walked outside, and in the dim light of that flickering street lamp, I thought I saw something moving near the construction site. It wasn't like anything I had seen before. It didn't just step out from the darkness. It seemed to materialize in the light before slipping back into the shadows of the building. And even though I could barely make out its shape, it definitely wasn't human. My blood ran cold. I turned and sprinted back to the apartment. By the time I got back inside, Marina had fallen asleep again. I didn't wake her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Lying in bed, I kept thinking about the connection between the banging stairwell door and whatever I'd seen outside. I remembered the night before, when I had stuck my head out the window and watched the door open and close by itself. A chill ran through me, and for the first time since we'd lived here, I was genuinely scared. How long had we lived here, and I'd never noticed anything like this before? Sure, I'd heard stories about people going missing around the abandoned building, but I always figured it was just because they weren't being careful. But now, my mind was racing. How could a heavy, solid stairwell door move like a rag doll on its own? Just then, there was a knock on our apartment door. It was like being doused with cold water. Another knock, this time louder. I opened my eyes wide, my heart pounding. The knocks grew more insistent, and that's when Marina woke up. "What's going on?" she asked. "Just stay calm," I said. "I'll check it out." I didn't want to tell her what I'd seen earlier. I kept trying to rationalize everything, but deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. I got out of bed and headed toward the hallway. The knocking continued, growing louder and more frantic. I didn't rush to open the door right away. Instead, I peeked through the peephole, but the stairwell was completely dark. I couldn't see anything except for the vague outline of the railing. I didn't waste time thinking about it. I grabbed a flashlight from the shelf. It was a powerful one, the kind you could use for night fishing. I turned it on and headed to the kitchen, opening the window that faced the front of the building. I aimed the flashlight at the area in front of the stairwell. What I saw nearly made me drop the flashlight. There were things standing right in front of the entrance to our building. They were barely visible, but once the light hit them, it became clear. There were 5 or 6 of them. I didn't have time to count. I didn't want to. These figures looked like children or teenagers, but something was horribly wrong with them. They weren't real. They were deformed, disfigured. Some stood hunched over while others were twisted in unnatural positions, like their bones were broken. A few of them were on all fours. They didn't make a sound, except for the faint knocking on the door and the occasional shuffle of feet. The scariest part was that I couldn't see them at all until I shined the flashlight on them. As soon as the light hit them, they all turned their heads toward me at once. Their faces were twisted in expressions of rage and sorrow, an unsettling mix of emotions. And then, as if following some invisible command, they all opened the stairwell door and rushed inside. I froze, trembling, but I kept the flashlight on. My legs felt weak, like I might collapse any moment. I aimed the beam toward the abandoned building, but as soon as the light reached it, I saw something else. This time, it wasn't children, but adult-sized figures running toward our building from the shadows. Suddenly, I heard a scream from the stairwell. It was Marina. I bolted for the door, fear coursing through my veins, and sprinted toward her voice. "Alex!" she screamed, her voice filled with terror. I rushed out into the stairwell, but I couldn't see a thing. These things, whatever they were, seemed to vanish into the darkness. "Stay where you are!" I shouted, racing back into the apartment. I grabbed the flashlight again and pointed it into the stairwell. There was no sign of them, those twisted figures. They had disappeared, like they had never been there in the first place. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what had just happened. Whatever those things were, they had come from the abandoned building, and now Marina and I were in danger. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I knew we weren't safe here anymore. Marina was sobbing, and I tried my best to comfort her, but I was just as scared as she was. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, and I didn't want to try. The only thing I could think to do was call the police. After what felt like an eternity, the police finally arrived. I explained everything to them, even though I knew it sounded insane. One of the officers, clearly skeptical, took a deep breath and said, "You're not the first to report something strange happening around that building." He pulled out his phone and showed me some photos. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The images were of missing children, reported years ago. As I scrolled through the pictures, a sinking feeling set in. These were the same children I had seen outside, the ones banging on the stairwell door. The officer leaned in closer and whispered, "We've had reports like this before, but nobody can explain it. It's like they vanish into thin air. No bodies, no traces, nothing." I didn't know what to say. The images of those twisted faces were burned into my mind, and now I understood why Marina had been so scared. The officer continued, "People have gone missing in that abandoned building for years. Dogs refuse to go anywhere near it, and even the bravest people won't step inside after dark. We've never found a single trace of anyone who's disappeared there. Not bones, not clothes, nothing." As he spoke, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Whatever I had seen that night wasn't human, and whatever was happening around that abandoned building was far from normal. I sat there, smoking a cigarette I had bummed from one of the officers, trying to process what had just happened. The officer's words echoed in my head. People go missing around that building, and they never find anything. No remains, no clues. I had heard rumors before, but I never really believed them, until now. As I sat there, staring at the ground, the officer showed me more photos. The kids, the ones who had gone missing, were the same ones I had seen outside my building, disfigured and twisted. I could feel my stomach turning. My mind was racing, but I couldn't make sense of any of it. "What do you think happened to them?" I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. The officer shrugged. "We've seen some weird stuff around here, but this?" He sighed, then leaned in closer. "I've been on the force for over 20 years, and I've never come across something like this. It's not normal. I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, it's not something we can explain." I nodded, not really sure what else to say. The officer packed up his things, gave me a look that said, "You're on your own with this one," and then they left. Marina was still in shock, and honestly, so was I. We didn't talk much after the cops left. What was there to say? Everything we had just experienced was so beyond anything I could wrap my head around. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't sleep much. Every little sound made my heart race, and every time I walked by the window, I couldn't help but glance at that abandoned building. I kept seeing those twisted figures in my mind, the way they moved, the way they looked at me with those haunting expressions. It was clear to me now that the banging on the stairwell door and the figures I saw outside were connected to the abandoned building. But why? And what did they want? A few days later, Marina had had enough. She told me she couldn't stay there anymore. She was terrified, and I couldn't blame her. I was scared too. I tried to stay rational, to tell myself it was just our imagination, but after what we had seen, there was no way to ignore it anymore. We packed up some things and left that apartment. We didn't tell anyone why. What could we say? That we were being haunted by ghostly, disfigured children from an abandoned building. No one would believe us. We barely believed it ourselves. We moved to a different part of town, far away from that cursed building. I never went back, and neither did Marina. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that place and wonder if the banging on the doors is still happening. I wonder if anyone else has seen what we saw. One thing's for sure, I'll never forget that night, and I'll never go near that abandoned building again.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Together we can take this channel to the next level, and don't forget to check out this video.